Hey everybody, Red Mage here. Welcome back to this series where I go through different RPG products that I have and give them a quick flip through and review. In this one I'm going to be going through 5 books, although really it's 8 dungeons because one of them has 4 very short dungeons inside. But these are all very, very short, and most of them are pay what you want over on DTRPG. Now a couple of them are not pay what you want. They're a couple dollars. One of them's $1, one of them's $2.50. You can get the bundle of the two. I'll show you guys for pretty cheap. But these are all very, very inexpensive adventures, so don't worry about that. This first one is pay what you want. It's the Tombs of Sorrowglass. This is a brand new adventure that was just released. It was an entry in the Appendix N jam for Old School Essentials. And a handful of those adventures are out on DTRPG for pay what you want. Some of them have, there's some more that you can buy for some money. But this one stood out to me, well, for a lot of reasons. The art is striking, the images are striking, but the idea is also really, really cool. I'm also going to be covering the Copper Circle, which is a fantasy adventure site, which it's kind of for Old School Essentials. It's kind of for any fantasy game, but it's a really cool little dungeon. Mostly a puzzle dungeon, but there's some interesting fights in it and some interesting negotiations that are happening too, but it's very small. I'm going to be covering A Stinking Suspicion, which is a short little dungeon underneath a village for Shadowdark / Morkborg. And this one was sent to me, as was the next one, inside the Everflowing Curtain. It's the same idea. It's a short dungeon. This one's in an old sort of wizard's tower, or not tower exactly, but his lair in a mountain. And there's some really cool encounters here. Both of these, as I said, were sent to me. And these are by the same creators as the Chateau Among the Stars, which I've reviewed before, which is a really, really cool adventure. And I like these ones. They're in the same vein as that. And then finally, I'm going to be going through the 4 adventures in Should Have Stayed at Home, which I want to talk about this one when we get to it. But the idea here is that these are anti-dungeons, or nega dungeons, as the creator Simon Carrier calls them. Now, Simon Carrier, I've featured him on 2 of my videos before, and I've talked about his work in in a set of videos, because he did The Great Dwarf Road. He did just a lot of really cool short adventures and adventure sites, and they're just really awesome. Ill Met in the City is the other set of locations that you can get that I've reviewed before on the channel, and that is one of my favorite, how would you call it, picaresque, short, flavorful little locations that you could find in a settlement or in a big city. Really, really cool. I used a bunch of them in one of my campaigns. This is a fascinating idea. I'll come back to it. First, I want to go through the Tombs of Sorrowglass. So, the Tombs of Sorrowglass is a very short adventure. It's just a few pages. I love this piece of art. I like the little sticker there. But as I said, it was for a game jam, and it's released pay what you want for Old School Essentials. Now, really, this is the whole dungeon. I mean, there's some more stuff on the last page, but what you get is a brief overview. The idea here is that there was this kind of a mausoleum for the souls of elves, but instead of being bodies, basically their souls were stored in crystals, and it was underground, and it was sealed away, the umbral elves. But then recently there was an earthquake, and the chamber where it was open to the sunlight, and as a result it catches this like scintillating, beautiful panoply of color, because it catches the light, and it's unknown to the umbral elves. It's just this really beautiful, beautiful glass that was used, and so it's this really, really cool place, and it's divided up into all of these sub rooms. But the way that you generate the dungeon is really random. You're rolling for, I mean, you wouldn't have to roll, you could just pick. But the idea is you roll for each of the rooms, you roll for the encounters there, the features that are there, where the occupants might be. You even roll to see where kind of an outer room where the wall has been shattered, allowing entrance or exit. So there's other places you can get in besides just the front doors, which are closed but unlocked. So there's other ways to get into. Now, if you happen to roll double ones, then there would be a breakage there, because you roll 2d6 to determine where the breakage is. But you could do really, you could put it on the opposite side, so it would allow for multiple ways in. But because it's randomly generated, or at least you're randomly generating it, you might have a reason to pick one or another, or one room. Depending on what you've generated there, you might say, "Ooh, I actually want them to start here," and you might break it or something like that, and that's where they start. There are some bandits who are pretending to be elven nobles, and they're kind of a funny comic relief, sort of. And then there's just the stuff in the rooms and the treasure that you can find here. It's really, really straightforward, but it's really cool. And I like the location. It's the sort of location I would put into my world, assuming the sort of assumptions about the races, like this idea of umbral elves, made sense in the world. But if it does, then you could put it in there. I guess there's a sense that this is sort of like a desert or something like that, because there's camel herders and there's sort of there's a desert described, but it wouldn't really have to be a desert. You could kind of do whatever you wanted there. You have some stat blocks at the back of the book, as well as the comic bandits, basically. And then you have revivified elven souls, because you can revivify them through the crystals. And then that might be, maybe that's really why you're here. So regardless, I think this is a really cool little dungeon, a really cool little adventure. You guys should go check it out. As I said, it's pay what you want over on DTRPG. And if you use it, I would say throw them $1 or $2, because this is a really cool adventure. Just the location's great, and it has value there for sure. The next one, as I said, is the Copper Circle. Now, this was for another sort of contest. So this is another jam adventure, I think, and this one won second place. I think it was Cold Light Press ran. Cold Light Press ran an adventure contest, and this adventure won second place. And I can see why. I don't know what won first place, but I can see why this was in the running, because it's a really cool adventure. The art is great, very flavorful, and actually, for being a very short dungeon, being only 7 pages, there's quite a lot of it. You get something or a couple pieces on almost every page. Now this is I guess it's for AD&D, first edition, but you can use old school essentials. I thought it was old school essentials. It's not old school essentials, but you could use almost any old school game. But the idea here is that there's this massive construct that was built by a once great wizard, Thenzer, who has a spell which, for copyright reasons, is not mentioned here. That's the idea throughout. There's this spell that it creates a circular plane of null gravity that can carry a lot of weight, and it follows the caster around. I think we all know the kind of spell that is being talked about there, but it's not the name of the wizard, it's Thenzer in this one. And so Thenzer's circular plane of null gravity is the spell that he was famous for, and he carried every coin out of the dungeon, and all of the copper that he caught is useful for anything else, so he melted it down and then reshaped it into this massive cylinder, which is 200 feet wide and 60 feet high, and it's his dungeon that it floats around. So it's you're adventuring inside a massive copper Tenzer's floating disc, right? That's so cool. And so it's floating around the world, and it can float with controls inside. You can find out how to regain control of it. There are smaller mage discs that are floating around the dungeon, and you're encountering psionic pygmies who have come here and are trying to find their way through and trying to do their own thing. There's a bronze dragon in here who's just sleeping in the back and kind of just chilling. There are some demons, and there's a lot of puzzles. Lots of pretty significant traps as well. It's a very small dungeon, only 12 rooms, but I want to show you the last map because it's such a cool map. I love that. There's the VTT on the left, and then there's the referee map on the right. It's really cool looking. That's funny, both of these first two dungeons are circular, but I think this is really cool. And the very idea that you're going inside a massive Tenzer's floating disc made of copper, that's so cool. So anyway, I'd recommend you guys check this one out. It's a really cool dungeon. It's very simple, but as you can see, it's laid out really well. There's a lot of good flow. There are puzzles and clues that are pretty good, and there are lots of different things to do, in fact. It's small, but there's actually a surprising amount of reasons why you might come here, why you might want to take control of this place, different forces of opposition, different kinds of treasure in here. And there's a sort of an ex-adventuring party, or an adventuring party. Most of them are dead. At least one of them is still alive. And you can, maybe you're here to find them. Maybe they're sort of a rival party. There's just actually a lot going on for a very small dungeon. Again, I can see why it won second place. And I was surprised because I had never ever encountered this before. So with the art and with the layout, it's old school. It's heavy on the paragraph length. There's some bolding and italics, which is cool, but otherwise it's not super easy to just easily read. but that's not really what it's going for, and it's so short, it's not ponderous at all. And with that map, I think it's really, really cool. So again, I highly recommend you guys check out the Copper Circle. It's a great little adventure. And again, it's pay what you want. So if you end up using it, I would say, throw me $1 or $2 or a couple dollars, because again, it is a really cool adventure. All right, now I'm going to go to the two that were sent to me, A Stinking Suspicion and Inside the Everflowing Curtain. Now you can get them singly, and A Stinking Suspicion is only $1. Inside the Everflowing Curtain is $2.50. If you buy them in a bundle, it's $2.50 for both, so you can get $1 off basically if you buy them together. If you just want Inside the Everflowing Curtain, then it's going to be $2.50 regardless. But I'll show you guys each of them. Thank you to the creator for sending them to me. There's great use of public domain art, or maybe not public domain art, but there's like packaged art or repackaged art. Like, for example, this is copyright by William McCausland, and it's used with permission here. So it's not made necessarily for this adventure, but it's used in a really good way. And the maps are all, the 2 maps for each of the adventures, the 3 maps, are designed for them. It's really, really cool. So this was given away at GaryCon, or distributed at GaryCon in March of 2025. Basically, in this one, there's a village, and some bad stuff has been happening beneath it. I'm not going to go through the whole adventure, again, because it's very short, and this one does cost some money, but I would recommend you guys go check it out. It's a great adventure. You can see its layout is very similar to the Keep, or the Chateau Among the Stars, which is one that I've reviewed before by the same creator. And it's also for Shadowdark and Morkborg, and so there's both stat blocks are given in various places. You get a very simple random encounter. One of the things I like about this first dungeon is that the village under which this dungeon is set was abandoned, and you really get the sense that this is an abandoned place. It's kind of interesting because one of the ways out of this dungeon is into the manor house of one of the local, like, rich aristocrat. And that's interesting because you could use this as an opportunity, if your players were of a certain moral character, to take advantage of the fact that the village is basically abandoned and start looting. So if they do manage to take care of what's going on down here, then they can start looting. But also, the idea here is that there was this cult underneath, and they got hold of a phylactery. And that phylactery is now mutating the water source with necrotic energy, and things have started to go wrong, including this little tiny octopus, which was down there, and then it became this massive, horrible thing. So that's cool, but the idea that there's a phylactery down here that you can destroy or not is actually a really cool link to a bigger adventure, right? Because maybe you destroy the phylactery, maybe you don't, but that's going to be something that is going to have implications, especially for the cult, which doesn't seem to be present. There are some zombies here, but there are no cult members left, at least that I can find. Again, maybe they abandoned this whole thing after the, maybe they were part of the townsfolk, right? And so when everybody left, they did too. And so maybe they won't be so happy to come back and find out that you have destroyed, if you destroy it, the players have destroyed the phylactery. Here's the map. Again, this is a 12-page dungeon. This is just, so it's a 12-page dungeon. It's a 12-room dungeon. So it's very short. But you can see I really like the way the map is laid out. There's a few paths through. There's a good flow from room to room. There's not a lot happening in each individual room in terms of encounters. There's a couple combat encounters down here, but really, if you're going to have some combat encounters, they're going to be rolled. And so it does lend to the sense of being kind of empty and abandoned, which is cool. And again, I think that could be an interesting idea for the players to come to a village which is abandoned, but has only just been abandoned because of what's going on. And then if they take care of it, again, maybe they can take advantage. But you could easily tie this into a much bigger adventure. Maybe they have to get into the manor house for some reason, and then you could build onto that, whatever it might be. As you can see, the main way down here is through room 1. That's down through the well. But over in 10, you can see there's a stairway that leads up to the manor house. And so that might be another way in or out. So A Stinking Suspicion is a really, really cool adventure. As I said, there's that whole idea of the phylactery, which is really cool. And then the giant squid at the end, or giant octopus at the end, which is really cool. But Inside the Everflowing Curtain, I think, is better. It's a little bit longer. It's 16 pages instead of 12. And once again, you get the same use of, I think, art that was made not specifically for this adventure, I don't think. But you get a really cool idea. Essentially, you start off by having the players looking into a crystal ball. So the idea is either you could just start off that way, or at some point in another adventure, the players run into a crystal ball, and when they touch it, they get the vision that kicks off the adventure. And it leads them to, as long as they do the proper prerequisites, it leads them to the dungeon. And again, there's some advice about you can skip this if you don't like that, you can do this, that, or the other thing. But as written, you're supposed to get wood from a dryad's tree and ignite it with living fire. And if you do that, then you can find the full-on dungeon. The dungeon itself is a war mage's lair, and it's got some creatures that are still here to defend it. He had a failed magical ritual, and so he's not here anymore whenever you have a failed magical ritual. I really quickly want to jump ahead. There's a really cool layout for the magic staff there, the Staff of Rulership, which is what you're trying to make. But I wanted to show you guys the map here because this is a really cool map for a number of reasons. First of all, it looks a little linear at first, right? You see, okay, well, on the left map, which is the first floor, you can choose left or right. It branches, rather than looping, right? So there's no serious loops here. But if you take both floors together, then you see there's actually loops and multiple paths up and down. So not only can you go from 7 to 13 and from 3 to 10, but you can also go from 6 to that bridge across from 12 to 13. So there are 3 ways to go from the first level down to the second level. So if the players decide they want to take a certain path or not, they can. That's really cool. So it isn't a linear dungeon where you're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you're going down. You can choose when you go down if you want to explore the whole floor, double back, take a different approach. If you go down and something's too dangerous down there for you, you back up and take a different route. I like that a lot. Now, ultimately, you have to go from 10 to 14 to 15 to 16. That's linear once you get to room 10. But 13, 12, 11, 3, 4, 5, 6, how you do that, it's up to you. It's a really cool dungeon. Once again, it has a sense of being empty, aside from a few creatures and some bats and things like that. So it's not a really, really heavy combat dungeon. It's more going to be spooky, and it's going to be atmospheric, and it's going to be a really, I think, a good fit with Shadowdark and Morkborg. Well, not that I know Morkborg well, but I think it's a good fit with Shadowdark for sure. So anyway, I think you guys should check it out. And again, thank you to the creator for sending me these too. Finally, I wanted to mention and go through Should Have Stayed at Home. This is another pay what you want adventure or set of adventures. And it's such a funny idea, so I really don't know what I think about it. 4 anti-dungeons to bore and disappoint your players. And it's so funny. Simon Carrier's writing style is excellent to me. I love it. This is the Great Dwarf Road is one of my favorite things that has been created that I've run into since I've started the channel. It really is excellent. And Ilmet in the City has some fantastic locations that are hilarious and fun. This seems so strange. I'll read through the couple paragraphs here just because I think it's so funny. This is a collection of dungeons which will very likely suck for your players. They're boring or ungameable or unrewarding or some combination of all 3. There's not enough treasure, there's nothing to do, and they don't play fair. Am I stupid? Why make dungeons which aren't any fun? Why run dungeons that are not any fun? We have limited time on this trash fire earth. Why waste any of it on something that makes your life even worse? Here's the thing. They look like dungeons, but they're not really dungeons at all. They're traps. They're traps at the strategic level of your campaign. You place them in your campaign for the same reason that you put traps in a dungeon. They provoke more interesting doctrine of exploration. They make the strategic landscape more varied and meaningful. A world full of balanced, interesting, and fair dungeons isn't an adventure, it's a fairground ride. If every dungeon is fun and exciting and full of gold, then it doesn't matter which one you explore. When some of the dungeons are traps, then you have to take care which hooks you follow. You have to pay attention to the clues the world is giving you. You have to decide when to cut your losses. When the old man in the village tells you that no one returns from the valley alive, perhaps you better listen. Am I really telling you to run dungeons that you know are going to be a bad time? Surely we can have trap dungeons that are still fun for the players. No, I say. That is cowardice. The risk of having a bad time is what makes the good times worthwhile. This game has real risks. When things go bad, it hurts for real. Losing is a kick in the teeth. Sometimes that's the sharp tragedy of a character death, and sometimes it's the empty feeling of realizing that none of the last 2 hours mattered at all. Now, there is an interesting caveat to this. That's what he says in that, not the next paragraph, but one. He says, well, actually I'll read both, because again, I think this is an interesting thesis, right? It's a presentation of an idea. A trap dungeon prods us to do something different next time. If we want to have fun playing this game, we need to work at it. This is the radically empowering heart of this game. It is exactly and only what the players make it, for good and for ill. It goes without saying, and this is the caveat, it goes without saying that these dungeons only make sense in the context of a sandbox campaign. Don't show up to game night with one of these dungeons in hand promising a fun evening of play and then laugh when there's nothing but disappointment. These are for campaigns where the players can choose which dungeons they explore and, crucially, choose which dungeons they ignore. So that's the caveat here, right? You don't use these dungeons to be like, ha, I'm going to waste your guys' Saturday evening. These are, you put them in a world to make the world feel more real. Because some of these dungeons have already been looted, some of these dungeons don't exist, some of these dungeons have treasure, but to get to the treasure is such a slog and kind of, you have to be so lucky that it's almost basically impossible. And some of these dungeons are basically, as he puts it, you'll see, the Crown Lord Necropolis. It's the closest thing to a traditional dungeon, but he says it's more like a slot machine. It pays out slightly less than it costs to play. Each door is a pull of a lever, offering the chance of a big payout, but more often resulting in a dangerous fight. When it does pay out, it's only just enough to keep you hopeful. So, if you guys have ever seen something like Barrow Maze, I think there's something like this at play there, right? If you look at the surface level with those barrows, sometimes those barrows are basically just empty. And sometimes, if you go down below, there'll be rooms in the dungeon which are full of, say, burial alcoves. And like 2 of them have anything, and they're not even that valuable. It's copper. So the players spend in-game like 3 hours searching, and they find nothing of value. I think that's actually kind of cool. So on the one hand, like I said, I'm kind of conflicted about these. On the one hand, I think, well, okay, are the players going to really come back if they have a terrible session a couple sessions in a row, even though it's their choice? They've picked the dungeon. They happen to pick the hooks to the nega dungeons, the anti-dungeons. Well, okay. I don't think I would kind of play that to the hilt. He says, no, that's cowardice. I think I might be cowardly there. I think I would maybe do this once, but not twice in a row. If they chose a second one of these useless adventures, I'd probably try to make it interesting. And actually, what I have to say is that even for being anti-dungeons, I would say actually all of these could be fun for the right group. Even the Balding Knobs, which is an empty dungeon. Because, and I think there's one thing here that's important there. Players, if you use things like this, players will never know whether they just didn't get lucky, whether they got unlucky, whether they just didn't get lucky, or whether they didn't find the thing, whether they didn't do the right thing to find the dungeon. Right? Now, one of the things he says is this is not the over-leveled dungeon, right? This is not an over-leveled dungeon. That's not what this is. These are new sorts of anti-dungeons, not the ones that are sudden danger and sudden deadliness and sudden random traps. These are more like low stakes. They probably won't kill your characters, at least not immediately. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys a couple of them. Well, actually, I'll go through all 4, because this is pretty short. You have the Crown Lord Necropolis, which is, as he said, it's the closest to an actual dungeon. But the problem is, the payoff is just not worth what it costs to get through it. There are some hard monsters in here, and each one is going to maybe give you something, and you can get some good things, like a +2 magic sword for one of them. But you have to beat a very hard fight to do it, and it might cost a character, might cost you some resources. It might not actually be worth it. And in terms of time investment, it might not actually be all of that worth it either. But as you can see, there is some treasure in here. You can find some pretty good treasure, I should say. But you're also dealing with a lot of relatively difficult creatures. So here are the tombs, and it's very simple dungeon map. Each of them are tied to a different encounter. Sir Orfeo is, for example, you can get his Defender Sword +2, but you have to defeat him in a fair duel. And if you do that, then you can take a +2 Defender Sword. Otherwise, it's cursed. Right? Each of them, so they're kind of like trick dungeons, kind of like trick fights. Lady Herodes was the wife of Sir Orfeo and the wizard of King Alessandra's court. She will greet visitors to her cell as if they were nobles of a foreign court with dignity and respect. Visitors to her cell as if they were nobles of a foreign court with dignity and respect. She casts a charm on the whole party, inviting them to stay and enjoy her hospitality. Those who do so will stay forever. slowly starving as they devour the illusory feast. If her charms fail her, she'll be coldly indifferent. It's actually just kind of a worthless encounter. So anyway, you get the idea here that there is some stuff you could get here, but ultimately it's not it's not very good. Or to get it, it's actually rather difficult. Sir Orfeo has 2,000 gold pieces in cell furnishings and a +2 defender sword, if you do it the right way. Scorba's Vaults is another one. It's sort of a hex crawl, and in order to find the vaults, you have to dig in various locations for a long time, and you have to do so with barbarians who aren't happy that you're there. So there's sort of barbarian tribes who claim these hills, and if you go around and just start digging, they're going to be very unhappy. The Queen of the Barbarians is going to send people to stop you. So it's like fighting while you're trying to dig, and the rules for digging are kind of intense. You can see excavating the vaults. And at the end of most of them, most of the vaults don't have that much going on for them. You might have 100 gold pieces in Vault 1. You might have a branch of the golden tree, which is really cool. And if you go into the treasure room in Vault 1, you can find 5,000 gold pieces worth of silver coins. That's a lot of silver, right? A lot of silver. But to get to that, you're going to have to dig and dig and dig and dig. And each man-hour of work, there's a 1 in 20 chance of a worker taking d6 damage, which for a peasant, if say you bring a bunch of peasants up here, they're just going to die. The same thing is true for each of these vaults. You can get a lot of money, but you have to spend so much time digging. The Baldy Knobs is literally just an empty dungeon. There's some feral hogs that you can fight if you kind of force them to, but they run away from you unless you corner them. The only treasure that I found in here was a little chip of garnet worth a silver cloak pin decorated with a chip of garnet. It's worth 4 gold pieces. So that's it. It's a bunch of tunnels, and occasionally you can the kind of encounters that you run into here are D6 feral hogs with a 50% chance of being accompanied by a boar who will flee, D4+1 youths who are trying to prove their bravery. They have beer, a shepherd looking for a lost sheep, the sheep, an old woman from the village who comes to pray, and a local lord and his retainer mounted hunting boar. So it really is just a nothing dungeon. But again, if you think about what the creator said in that introduction, maybe there's a value to that. Especially if you have a big hex crawl and you do want to make things be a little bit more quote-unquote realistic. One of the things that's often commented about, those, we have, funhouse dungeons and hotel dungeons, right? Monster hotels. But very often we also put sort of dungeons so close to each other, or relatively close to each other, that you're like, man, this is crazy. There's just tons and tons of random gold and silver and treasure and monsters and magic all within a 50-mile radius. That's crazy. So having a couple of these dungeons might help to balance that out a little bit. I don't know. And then Queen Orlaith's Mine just doesn't exist. It's not real. So there's a hex crawl here and the encounters you can have, but there's people, and you can talk to them, and you can run into rival treasure hunters, and that might become an interesting thing. And there's some sort of like back and forths with some of the people around here, the opportunists, the rival treasure hunters, the locals. There's some drama you could have with them. But most of the time, well, the whole time, the players are looking for some vast treasure out here, and they're not going to find it. There's some cool landmarks, but again, they're just very simple. This is hilarious, and I can't believe no one's ever done this before. At least I've never run into it. Should have stayed at home. 4 anti-dungeons to bore and disappoint your players. So first of all, it's pay what you want. I recommend you guys get this. But if you're making a hex crawl, like a sandbox, I might genuinely consider putting these in. In fact, I'm tempted to add these into my game, my next hex crawl. Just because, I don't know, there's something about this that really appeals to me. To as he says, to make that question of, right, why do you have a trap in a dungeon? Well, it's the same thing. To exercise your creative thinking, to exercise your discernment, your prudence, to test the players and the characters. Well, maybe you could have locations like that too. Are we really likely to find anything in this rumored dungeon? No one's ever seen it. No one even knows exactly where it is. It's just up there in the hills somewhere. you know, it provides a very different experience than you're wandering for a few minutes and you suddenly, you know, happen upon the entrance to the cave. That's exactly what you're looking for, right? It's a different experience to that. And I think there are some players who might appreciate a world where there are anti-dungeons in it and rumors that don't lead anywhere. Now, I've talked about this before. False rumors. I don't like false rumors. So I'm torn here. I have to say it. I'm torn here because what I really don't like are I don't like tricking the players this way. But if you establish early on that there is a world of false rumors and a world of anti-dungeons and a world of where you have to be careful and it has to make sense. And that's the thing. What you want to do with these would be to do what you want to do with false rumors, right? Which is to make it such that if the players just follow every hook and believe everyone, then they're going to run into false things. So just so, right, if you put false rumors in the mouths of unreliable narrators, unreliable townsfolk, the town drunk, unless there's a reason for the town drunk to know, maybe the players can find out he's an ex-adventurer and he drinks to forget the horrors that he's seen, well then maybe you should listen to him when he talks about rumors. But if he's a town drunk who just he's never left the village and he just whatever, well then maybe you shouldn't, right? But if he says something, you have to, you know, see who's the messenger. And I think if you built these sorts of anti-dungeons with that sort of design in mind, where you didn't just say, hey, again, we're going to run a dungeon tonight, and it's a stupid dungeon that doesn't matter and doesn't have any treasure. And you made it clear that, like, if the players do follow up on one of these anti-dungeons and it turns out to be nothing, you want to make sure that they don't blame you or the world, they blame themselves, right? So provide them with enough information. Give the hooks to these things to people who maybe the players should know better than to trust. Or maybe the very fact that the hook leads to one of these anti-dungeons proves to the players that they shouldn't trust this person moving forward, and make that be true, make that be real, right? You don't want to have somebody who's always right, and then suddenly they lead them to an anti-dungeon, and then after that they're always right. I would use this as a teaching moment in world for the characters. The characters run into a guy who says, hey, I know about a bunch of dungeons, and he starts giving them hooks to them, and they go to two of them and they're fake, Crown Lord Necropolis and Scorba's Vaults, and they don't work out, right? Or they go to the Baldy Knobs and Queen Orlith's Mine, and it doesn't work out because there's no dungeon there. And then he's like, guys, I know of a new dungeon. They should ignore him. And that should be the right decision. You shouldn't make it so that, you know, the first two times they've listened to him, he's been wrong. But this third time, unless there's some good reason for him to be right. Anyway, I don't want to, go on too long about that. But I think if you were to build a world like that, this would make sense. And that's what I want to try to do with my next Hexcrawl, is build a world like that. So I think I do want to include these. All right, well, anyway, this has been 8 full dungeons, but really just 5 books. It should have stayed at home, Inside the Everflowing Curtain, A Stinking Suspicion, The Copper Circle, and The Tombs of Sorrowglass. I'll put links below to where you guys can get them all. And again, all but The Stinking Suspicion and Inside the Everflowing Curtain are pay what you want. All right, guys, I hope this has been interesting, and I'll see you all in another video.